This is a true horror story. This happened at my school. I worked as a night watchman at a high school located in the suburbs of Seoul from 1992 to 1993. And one day I experienced something unbelievable. I want to tell you the ghost story that occurred during my night shift between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Before I begin, I want to emphasize that what I am about to share with you is not based on rumors. I personally witnessed this ghost, and even now, more than 30 years later, I still cannot bring myself to enter that room. And I'm Kwon Haeon, a former night guard at a high school in the suburbs of Seoul. I remember clearly in the spring of 1992, it was my third day at work. As soon as I arrived at the school, I started my rounds by inspecting the classrooms on the third floor, which were usually occupied by first-year students. By 10 p.m., most of the students had gone home, leaving only a few. I made my way through the empty hallways, ensuring all the classrooms were empty before moving on that particular day. However, I noticed the light in room 36 was still on when I approached the classroom. I thought to myself, there shouldn't be anyone in there. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. So I tried opening it. To my surprise, the door was unlocked. Feeling a little uneasy, I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open and stepping inside. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw a student seated at the last desk writing something. He was wearing the mandatory school uniform, a white shirt, and his hair was neatly combed. Startled by the sudden appearance of another person, he looked up from his desk and smiled politely. "I'm sorry, Uncle. I must have been studying too hard to notice you come in. I have an exam tomorrow, so I stayed late," he said with a smile. I responded with a nod, telling him to remember to lock the door behind him before leaving. I continued my patrol, thinking nothing more of the encounter. When I passed by room 306 again at 11 o'clock, the classroom was completely dark and the door was locked from the outside. I assumed the student had already gone home and paid no further attention to it. However, the next morning, I couldn't help but wonder who that student was, since the classes wouldn't start for another 2 hours. As I entered the classroom, I noticed that the windows were tightly shut, indicating that the student hadn't left through the window. Since the door was locked from the outside, it meant that someone had locked the student inside the classroom, raising questions about how he managed to get out. Curious, I decided to investigate further. While searching the room, I found a student's ID card under the desk, confirming that the student I had encountered was named Choi Jae Hoyen. Further inquiries revealed that Choi had indeed committed suicide a month prior, in that very classroom. Even now, thinking back to the incident, I can't help but shiver. You might wonder why I didn't believe Koya's spirit was haunting the classroom. That's because back then, I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural phenomena. I attributed the eerie experience to my active imagination, which was likely heightened due to the recent news reports about Koya's death. After that incident, I continued working at the school without giving it much thought. However, I never forgot the encounter and often wondered if what I had seen was truly a ghost. The mystery remained unsolved. Several months passed, and one night as I was making my rounds, I heard a loud noise coming from room 306. When I cautiously approached the classroom, I could hear chains dragging, metal moans, and the sound of heavy footsteps. I stood outside the door, frozen with fear, unable to decide whether to open it or run away. Then I heard a voice calling out, "Help me!" My heart pounded in my chest. Should I check it out? Curiosity battled with fear within me. Suddenly, I felt a strong push on my shoulder. I turned around, but no one was there. Shaken by the sudden contact, I stumbled backward and accidentally knocked over a nearby chair. Determined to confront whatever was happening, I slowly walked toward the classroom door and gently knocked. "Hello, is anyone there?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. There was no response except for the dragging chains and heavy footsteps. With my heart racing, I reached for the doorknob and pushed the door open. As I stepped into the classroom, my eyes quickly adjusted to the darkness. In front of me was a horrifying sight. It was as if the entire classroom had transformed into a torture chamber. Desks and chairs were overturned, and on the floor lay various objects like erasers, books, and even a metal ruler. It appeared as if someone had violently destroyed the classroom. Amidst the chaos, I noticed a student standing by the window. His face was pale and his eyes wide with terror. As he turned around, I saw his entire body covered in blood. His clothes were torn and his hair disheveled. With a terrified expression on his face, he began banging on the window, screaming for help. In a panic, I rushed to his side and asked, "What happened? How did you get hurt?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he continued to bang on the window, his cries echoing through the room. Fearing that he might hurt himself, I quickly ran over and pulled him away from the window. He looked at me with pleading eyes and mouthed the words, "Help me." His voice was weak and filled with despair. As I struggled to comprehend what was happening, I noticed a chilling detail. His skin was unnaturally cold, like touching ice. Despite my efforts to help, his body remained lifeless. Just as I realized he was a ghost, I heard a voice whispering in my ear, "Leave him alone. Let me take him." I turned around to find the source of the voice, but there was no one there. Terrified by the ghostly presence, I stumbled backward and tripped over a chair. As I fell to the ground, I saw the ghost of the student disappear through the window. With my mind racing, I rushed out of the classroom to find the teacher on duty. When I recounted the horrifying experience, they looked at me as if I were crazy. They insisted that such incidents were impossible and dismissed my claims as mere imagination. But something troubled me. Why would a ghost appear and then vanish after whispering in my ear? What did it mean? About 2 weeks after the incident, I was doing my usual rounds when I heard a loud commotion coming from room 306. Once again, the sound of dragging chains echoed through the hallway, accompanied by heavy footsteps and whispers. The ghostly voice seemed close, almost right beside me, saying, "Let me go." I didn't know what to do, but somehow my feet led me to the classroom door. When I opened it, I found myself facing a terrifying scene. On the floor was the same student from before, lying motionless. I rushed to his side, turned him over, and checked his pulse. His body was icy cold and his eyes wide open, staring blankly ahead. Suddenly, the ghost of the student who had appeared previously stood up next to me. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. With a voice filled with anguish, he whispered, "Help me, save me from here." I wanted to assist him, but his ghost was gradually becoming transparent. Then I noticed a noose around his neck. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face, and begged, "Please, take this off." I immediately understood that he had taken his own life by hanging. He didn't want to die here, but he was trapped and needed help. Despite his ethereal form, I knew I had to do something. I reached out to touch the rope, but my hand went right through it. Frustrated and desperate to help, I tried again, this time with more force. To my astonishment, the rope came off and the ghost collapsed to the ground. His body started to glow brightly, and then he vanished, leaving behind only a faint, sweet scent, reminiscent of lilies. Now, let me tell you something. I don't normally talk about these things, but I've never forgotten that student. I still dream about him sometimes. After what happened, some people say that dealing with ghosts is best left to those who are skilled in such matters. So I took a different approach. Instead of trying to figure it out on my own, I went to see a priest. I explained everything that had happened to him, including the part where the ghost asked me to remove the noose around his neck. Surprisingly, the priest listened patiently and didn't seem surprised by my story. He told me, "It sounds like that student is still suffering. He needs your help to find peace." After that, the priest performed an exorcism in room 306. The next time I entered that room, everything was different. It was as if the oppressive energy that had been there before was now gone. The classroom was filled with sunlight, and the air was fresh and clean. I learned that Choi Jae-hoon had been bullied by his classmates before his death. They used to call him names and make fun of him, and eventually he ended up taking his own life. The saddest part is that even after he died, his classmates didn't apologize for their behavior, and instead blamed him for causing trouble. I felt a sense of responsibility knowing that I could have helped Choi find peace sooner. If only I had acted earlier, maybe he wouldn't have suffered for so long. These days, many young people face similar challenges and end up taking their own lives. I hope that Choi's story can serve as a reminder for them to reach out for help when they're struggling, and that they know they're not alone in their pain. Next is photo with face erased. I worked as a night guard. One day I was tidying up the administrative office, and I quietly flipped through the old report cards of Class 1-2A of that year. Class 1-2A, which had a student named Choi, who would soon become my obsession, had dozens of records. Each one had full information about the student. Their name, date of birth, address, and a 3x4 ID photo pasted on the upper right corner. All of the photos were faded due to age, except for it wasn't discolored over time, nor was it a printing error. The face in the photo was completely blurred, as if a layer of gray smoke had covered only the face. The collar was still clear, the bangs were still visible, but the eyes, nose and mouth had completely disappeared. I felt cold. At first I thought it might be a printing error or an ink stain, but the more I checked the files, the more strange I found them. So I asked the principal for permission to borrow the group photo of Class 1-2A, which was taken right in the schoolyard. There were the homeroom teacher and nearly 40 students, including Choi. I followed each person's name to determine Choi's position in the photo, and then I saw a blur between two female students where someone was clearly standing. Choi's entire body appeared blurry like a moving photo. The uniform, the hand position, everything was visible, but the face was heavily blurred. No lines could be recognized. It was like the camera could never capture his face. I turned to the homeroom teacher of that year's class and asked carefully, "Teacher, is this student Choi?" The teacher did not answer right away. He just stared at the photo for a long time. Then he sighed, his voice low, as if swallowing something difficult to say. "Since Choi's death, all the photos with him are like that. We sent them to restore, enlarge, reprint. But when it came to his face, it was blurred, as if someone didn't want him to be seen." I didn't dare ask more. I only remember when I left the room. The class photo was still on the table, and under the dim white neon light, the blurred face seemed to slowly turn to look at me. The second story is, I am a night guard at the school. One night while I was patrolling the third floor, I heard the sound of dragging metal chairs from inside the music room. I stopped in my tracks. It was a weekend and no one should be in the music room. I stood outside the door listening. Inside, someone was dragging metal chairs across the wooden floor. The sound was slow and rhythmic. I hesitated for a moment, then reached out to knock on the door. As I raised my hand, the sound inside the room abruptly stopped. I knocked again. "Hello? Is anyone there?" No reply. I tried the doorknob, which was unlocked. I pushed the door open and walked in. Inside, dozens of chairs were neatly arranged in a circle, but no one was there. The windows were closed and locked from the inside, curtains drawn tightly. The room was dark, stuffy, and silent. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed a piano in the corner, its keys covered in a thick layer of dust. Above the piano was a whiteboard with a few chalk marks. I walked closer and saw that they were musical notes. As I continued exploring the room, I came across a music stand with a piece of sheet music on top. I bent down and saw that it was a song Choi would often play during his lifetime. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, filled with longing and sorrow. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss as I read through the notes. Suddenly, I heard a whisper behind me. "Playing this song makes me sad, don't you think?" I turned around, but there was no one there. I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, I was alone in that dark, silent room. However, as the night wore on, the whispers continued. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, echoing around me. I tried to focus on my work, but the whispers grew louder and more frequent, making it impossible to ignore. Determined to put an end to this, I stood up and walked towards the source of the whispers. As I moved, the notes on the whiteboard came into view. An idea struck me. I picked up a piece of chalk and began writing down the musical notes. As I wrote, the whispers gradually faded away, replaced by a strange humming sound. I finished writing down the notes and stepped back to admire my work. And that's when I heard it. The faint sound of a piano being played. I rushed to the piano and saw the keys moving on their own, playing the exact song whose notes I had just written on the whiteboard. The music filled the room, no longer mournful, but hopeful. As if bidding farewell to something, I watched in awe as the music swelled and then slowly faded away. When the last note echoed through the room, I felt a sense of peace. I knew then that Choi was no longer sad. He had finally found peace. After that night, the music room became my sanctuary. I would often visit during my breaks, sit at the piano and play the song whose notes were written on the whiteboard. And every time I played it, I felt connected to Choi, as if his spirit was playing alongside me. One day, I decided to share my experience with the school caretaker. I told him about the music room, the whispers, the piano playing on its own, and how it all pointed to Koi's presence. The caretaker listened intently, his expression grave. When I finished my story, he nodded slowly. I know about Choi. He loved music more than anything. When he passed away, his family donated the music room to the school, hoping that other students could find joy in music like he did. As the caretaker spoke, I felt a surge of sympathy for Choi. It was clear that he had been deeply loved by his family and the school cared for him. The caretaker continued, after his death, strange things started happening in the music room. Sometimes people would hear a piano playing on its own, or they would see the music stand move by itself. At first, we thought it was just our imagination, but then one day, a teacher went into the music room to practice, and she heard a voice. She couldn't believe it at first, but when she turned around, she saw a piano bench moving on its own. From then on, no one dared enter the music room alone. It was clear that Koi's spirit was still lingering in the music room, playing his beloved piano and watching over those who entered. Determined to honor Koi's memory, I decided to continue visiting the music room. I would sit at the piano and play, talking to Choi as if he were there with me. I told him about my life, my dreams and my fears, finding comfort in his silent presence. And as the months passed, I felt a deep connection with Choi. It was as if our spirits had intertwined through our shared love of music. One day, I brought my guitar to the music room. As I strummed the chords, I closed my eyes and imagined Choi sitting beside me, singing along to my songs. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. "You play well, but you're even better at singing." I turned around, but there was no one there. Then I heard the voice again. "Why don't you sing for me?" Startled, I quickly turned around, but I didn't see anyone. Ever since I discovered that student Choi Woo-jin's face is always blurred out, I can't sleep at night. Since that day, every morning around 2:45, I would hear footsteps dragging down the third-floor hallway. It sounded like someone was slowly walking towards the stairway while carrying a heavy bag. Because that noise only happened once a day and at the same time every day, I soon realized it must be an echo or something. That's what I thought. But the noise still bothered me until one night I decided to go up there and check. This third-floor hallway was an old classroom that had been abandoned after Choi passed away. So the third floor was almost deserted. Of course, I went up there alone because the school only had one night guard, me. That night, I brought a flashlight to check the entire third floor, especially the abandoned classrooms. When I entered the third floor hallway, the entire space was deathly silent. Not even the wind made any noise outside the window. I stood in front of the hallway, shining the flashlight around and making sure that no one was there. And suddenly, the fluorescent lights at the end of the hallway started flickering. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then the blinking became more frequent and stronger. It blinked exactly 3 times and then stopped. It was pitch black. I was so scared that I almost turned around and ran away. But then I noticed the door to class 3 to 6 was slightly ajar. I knew Choi had been in that room. I remembered because the homeroom teacher had pointed it out when she showed us Koi's seat. Of course, that room was scary enough, but there was something about it that intrigued me and made me want to go in. I moved closer to the door and shined my flashlight directly into the classroom. And what I saw made me scream. There was a shadow standing in the corner of the classroom. Small, thin, wearing a uniform, long hair covering his face. I couldn't see his face. He wasn't moving. He just stood there motionless while looking straight at me. I don't know how to describe what I saw. It was like seeing a ghost. But even though I couldn't see his face, I could feel that he was trying to tell me something. It was an urgent and desperate message. Although I wanted to run away right away, I couldn't move my legs for some reason. I was frozen in fear. Then the shadow took another step forward, and although I couldn't see his face, I could see the vague shape of his head. It was a small, thin head covered by a thick white fog, like a blurry white area. The next moment, he disappeared. I screamed and ran away. From that night, I knew for sure that what I experienced wasn't my imagination. I tried to tell other friends about it, but they just laughed at me. They said I had too much time on my hands and needed to focus on studying, so no one believed me. However, one day, I heard a rumor that someone visited the third floor at night and saw the same ghost. The rumor said that the ghost appeared in front of him and told him to get out of the school, but he didn't listen and kept asking which one of the teachers was a ghost. Then the ghost approached him and whispered in his ear, saying, "Don't you recognize me?" The next morning, that student suddenly disappeared. Nobody knows where he went. Some say he dropped out of school, but others say he joined the army. Nobody knows for sure. Afterward, people stopped talking about the third floor and the ghost, and I thought maybe I was the only one who could see him. But one day, I heard a shocking news about Choi. It said Choi, who had been missing for 3 months, was found dead, and the cause of his death was falling from height. His body was found on the playground of our school. Choi was a kind and smart guy who never caused trouble for anyone. He was bullied to the point of no return. A group of 5 male 12th graders, all sons of officials and powerful people in Korea, forced him to endure unimaginable things. Those 5 guys were Min Jae, Sung Ho, Dae Young, Jisoo, and Taewon. The beating they did to Choi was brutal. They stripped him naked, forced him to kneel and eat exam papers, and laughed at him when he cried, and he would have escaped if he could. Everyone witnessed those cruel acts, yet no one helped him or even dared to intervene. And that's why no one knows what exactly they did to him. On the morning of March 12th, Choi left a torn notebook in the classroom, then jumped from the 3rd floor to the schoolyard. He didn't leave a single note behind, so nobody knew why he committed suicide. All they found was a torn notebook with handwriting that seemed to be struggling. "Don't come near me. Please stop. Don't touch me." After Choi's funeral, the group of 5 students still graduated as if nothing had happened. However, after a few months, each of them had their own problems. I thought Woo Jin's departure was the end, but in fact, it was just the beginning of something more serious: punishment. Min Jae, the leader. 3 months after Woo Jin's death, Min Jae, the leader of the group, was preparing to go to Seoul to study at university. The night before leaving, he snaked into the school to retrieve the old yearbook that he had hidden behind the ceiling of the classroom. No one knew why, but the security camera recorded him standing in the exact spot where Woo Jin had jumped, looking down at the schoolyard, smiling. Then, he didn't jump, but he seemed to be pulled from behind. His body lay broken in the same position as Woo Jin that day. His eyes were wide open, his mouth torn from the smile that stretched from ear to ear. Sung Ho, the invisible passenger, a week after Min Jae's funeral, Sung Ho drove himself out to the suburbs in the middle of the night. To clear his head, he said, the police found his car crashed into a pole. The front end was crushed. The airbags had failed to deploy. In the glove box was a piece of paper scribbled, the ink shaking. I wasn't alone. He was in the back. I saw him in the mirror. He didn't have a face, but he was smiling. The autopsy revealed that he had stepped on the gas until his leg broke, as if he wanted to run away from something sitting behind him that no one could see. Dae Young memories from the abyss. That summer, during a class trip, Dae Young went trekking in the Gangwon Mountains with his classmates. At night, while the group was sleeping, he stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and walked into the forest without saying a word. When his tent mates woke up, all that was left was an empty blanket and a hastily thrown away flashlight. 3 days later, Dae Young's backpack was found wedged between 2 rocks on a cliff. Dae Young's body was found hanging from a tree branch, nearly 6 meters above the ground, with paper stuffed in his mouth. No one knew how he got there. Jisoo, crying from under the bed. Jisoo was the one who laughed the most in the group, But after the Dae-young incident, he barely talked to anyone. His roommate said that every night Jisoo would crawl under the bed to sleep, saying, "It's under here. If I lie on top, ... it'll climb on me." The climax was when his roommate woke up in the middle of the night because he heard giggling, but there was no one in the room except Jisoo, who was banging his head against the wall. That night, Jisoo scratched his face with his fingernails, screaming, "Dante, look at me. Don't let him look at me." Since then, Jisoo has been in a mental hospital, with both eyes always covered with white bandage. Taewon gouged out his own eyes to escape the gaze. The last one, Taewon, survived the longest. He dropped out of school, moved house, changed his name, but every night he had nightmares. In his diary, Taewon wrote that every time he slept, he dreamed of Choi sitting in front of him, with his back turned and writing. When he approached, Choi slowly turned his head, and his face had no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a blank white space. One night, the neighbors heard a loud knocking on the door. When they broke in, they found Taewon sitting in the middle of the room, his hands covered in blood, stabbing himself in the eye with a sharp object. On the wall, in blood, was scrawled, "I'm sorry. If I didn't see any more, maybe it would forgive me." The deaths of those 5 students were reported to me by the school board. I did not witness them, but that story made me believe in spirituality and ghosts, and I decided to quit my job right after that.